you guys for coming out today. Is this on? Yeah, can you hear me? Okay, cool. All right, so today we're going to be talking about English proficiency and the understanding and use of articles. So, yep. Before we begin, we'd like you to test yourself. Here we have a part of a sentence. I'm going to read the sentence out loud, and then when I get to the pause, I want you to see these 4 images and think and choose which one out of these 4 images would correspond correctly to complete the sentence. So I will say, the boy walked into the room and saw a, and I'll give you a couple seconds to think about it. And the correct answer would be chair. The boy walked into the room and saw a chair.
Okay, in a second example, I want you to test yourself again. So the sentence would read, the boy walked into the room and saw an, and I'll let you choose. Good job. He saw an apple, correct. So you can see that the indefinite article a usually precedes a word that starts with a consonant, and the indefinite article an precedes words that start with vowels.
So these 2 examples right here are different trials that the participants saw during our experiment. So on the left side, we have the same article or a matched article. And in this sense, participants could not use the article to predict the upcoming word in the sentence because both of the words that could function with the articles, both the singular pictures, both correspond with the same thing. Whereas the different articles or the mismatched articles allowed participants to illustrate prediction-based processing because A would only work for chair and an would only work for apple. So only one article corresponded to one image on the screen. And this is an example of what our entire project was about and what our participants did in Spain and Beijing.
So we've seen in past studies that native speakers of English are able to use current information to then anticipate new and upcoming information. Throughout this study, we were asking ourselves, can second language learners of English, specifically Spanish and Chinese native speakers, accomplish this same task? And why are we examining Spanish and Chinese bilinguals?
So we chose to study Spanish and Chinese bilinguals in particular because of interesting article characteristics of Spanish and Chinese. So in Spanish, articles encode very important information, such as the gender and number of the upcoming noun. And so native speakers of Spanish, they're used to paying attention to the articles in sentences. And in Chinese, there are actually no indefinite articles at all. So these Chinese English bilinguals must specifically learn this rule in classrooms. So
this led us to our prediction that Spanish speakers who learned English as a second language would be better at performing our task than Chinese bilinguals who learned English as a second language. This is solely due to the fact that Spanish bilinguals are exposed to articles in their daily life and can use this in a predictive context. In our experiment, participants heard a sentence similar to the one that was previously seen. And after the article was stated in the sentence, there was a predetermined 500 millisecond pause in every trial that the participants went through before the release of the target noun. In these 500 milliseconds, we were looking at the participants' eye movements to see if they were using prediction for the upcoming target noun that they were going to hear. And in this time, we were recording their eye movements.
All right, so to go over our results, this is a little bit much, so I'm going to explain to you what everything kind of means. The x-axis means the time in milliseconds, and then the y-axis is determining the differential proportions of fixations. So this means the target fixations minus the competitor fixations. And then the gray areas that you can see here is the time that the participants had to listen to the article, have time for their pause, and then listen to the target noun. The white area is just the baseline, and then the red line is the basically explaining the same article effect, and then the black line is explaining the different article effect. So as we can see here, if the y-axis line is at 0, this just means that the participants were looking at the target and competitor nouns equally, which means that they did not know what noun was to come next after hearing the article. Now, if the line is higher than 0, this means that they did find and identify a difference, and they were able to clearly know what noun was going to come after the article. So in the high proficiency, you can see that the black line is higher than the red line in their 500 millisecond pause. This is because it was evident to them that they knew after hearing the article and having their pause, they knew exactly what target noun was to come when seeing those 4 images. So they were able to understand this rule. However, you can see in the low proficiency participants, the lines are overlapping because they clearly could not identify what was to come next. They needed the full time to have their pause, and then they needed to hear the onset of the noun to then clearly choose which of the 4 images would be the correct one. So they stayed around the 0 area.
And so we did the same study in Beijing, and we found pretty similar results. So you see in the low proficiency category, the 2 different tests showcase similar results. The red line and the black line are overlapping, so we don't see much difference in predictive ability. And in the high proficiency group, we see that the different article question led to a higher amount of prediction than the same article question. So,
in conclusion, both the Spanish and Chinese high proficiency bilinguals were able to use articles to predict the upcoming noun. This was very important to study because second language learners of English are very explicitly taught that A is almost always followed by a consonant and an is almost always followed by a vowel. And this rule has very few exceptions. So when people are first learning English, this is very important for them to learn, but if people are not using this in a predictive fashion and aren't using it to facilitate their language processing, then it may not be as important to teach in the classroom. So after doing this study, we have seen that it does facilitate language processing, and it is very useful in teaching in the classroom and useful for these participants to practice on a daily basis. It looks like a couple of our pictures disappeared, but here are some pictures of our abroad experiences. We had an amazing time, and we're so lucky to have the experiences we did. Do you want to tell them?
So this is just me at Beijing, the Great Wall of China.
And the bottom 2 pictures are us with one of the other PIRE students who presented last week at La Alhambra in Granada. And in the top left, we had an opportunity to travel to Morocco and be able to embrace some of the other cultures around Europe. And